So, Asha, is Jim Jordan's weaponization committee a problem for the FBI?
It's complicated. I'm Asha Rangappa. I teach national security law at Yale University. I'm a former FBI special agent, and I'm a legal and national security analyst.
And I'm Renato Mariotti. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a practicing lawyer, and a legal analyst.
And we're here to help you understand topics that can't be boiled down to a soundbite or a tweet. So, where do we start?
Well, one thing let's start with, because I think it's really interesting, and I think we're going to have different perspectives on it, is this Washington Post story about disagreements between the DOJ and the FBI. I mean, it's very, very rare that such disagreements are public. In other words, just so people understand, when you are conducting a criminal investigation, DOJ prosecutors kind of lead investigations. At least that's the DOJ perspective, that we lead investigations and direct FBI agents, and there's often disagreements between us. I had more disagreements at the DEA, but there's disagreements often with the FBI. But those would get resolved internally. You rarely see news articles about it. And this suggests to me that there's some pretty disgruntled people, probably at the FBI, who were talking to reporters about it.
Yes. So, and I think what was unusual is that the disagreements between the DOJ and FBI were kind of flipped. In other words, normally it seems like the FBI wants to be more aggressive and it's DOJ that's putting on the brakes. And what the reporting suggested was that at least some officials in the FBI and agents were pushing back against taking aggressive steps against Donald Trump, specifically in terms of investigating him, even for the Mar-a-Lago documents, not even January 6th, the Mar-a-Lago documents, which are kind of straightforward and for which there is ample precedent on how people in similar situations have been treated. And it gets to, I think, a larger issue related to January 6th, which I wrote about in a piece for Just Security, about some concerning things that have emerged in terms of the reluctance to investigate Trump for January 6th. And, a lot of tips that were ignored, and then even in the aftermath, certain types of slow walking and resistance, which, by the way, was echoed by a report issued internally by the Office of Inspector General on the FBI's response to January 6th. So all of this is painting a picture of at least some subset of the FBI either sympathizing or having support for Trump and or January 6th, or at the very least being afraid of pursuing investigations because of possible retaliation against them. And we can talk about how that connects to Jim Jordan's subcommittee in a second, but I'll pause right there.
Yeah, I do think there's a connection, but this is I think there's an interesting connection between these two, and we can talk more about that. But I think just as a starting point, I did find one thing I found very disturbing about that article was the fact that folks at the FBI agents and people who are supervisors there were focused on and concerned about public blowback from the Trump camp, from Trump and his allies against them. And it really suggests to me that the sort of disinformation campaign against Comey, Strzok, Page, all of those McCabe, thank you, worked, and it really got the FBI to pull its punches against Trump. It's very concerning to me because, look, I was a federal prosecutor for a long time. Now I'm on the other side. The FBI is usually not pulling punches. And like you suggested, usually, when I was a federal prosecutor, I was the one trying to explain to agents, like, no, we can't do this, we can't do that. Actually, it's a lot harder to make our case than you think. And no, it's not, we can't just wrap it up now, and there's a lot more to do. Usually I was was like the whatever, the one who was providing caution. That was usually, like you suggested earlier, Asha, the role of the prosecutor there. I'm not used to the FBI being the one like too concerned and worried about going in. And I don't think it's ever appropriate for prosecutors to consider criticism, to consider and by the way, I say prosecutors, the FBI as well. Law enforcement should not be concerned about, well, how are we going to look in the media? I mean, frankly, that was the Comey problem that got the FBI in a lot of trouble in the first place. But that's really problematic because it means if you're rich, if you're powerful, if you have a lot of influence, you can get away with things that other people can't. I mean, it's just really, it's almost corrupt.
Yeah, and it does seem like the concerns that were expressed and resistance that was expressed by these agents and senior officials impacted how that investigation proceeded. That sort of so prosecutors wanted to execute a search warrant initially, and as a result of this resistance to doing that, they sort of settled on this interim measure of issuing a subpoena for the documents to be turned over, which kind of goes to how the Department of Justice went above and beyond to try to accommodate and be as non-intrusive as possible for Trump. It also suggests that had Trump just turned over everything at that time, this would all be over right now. And what was amazing, the second amazing thing was after that subpoena was executed, I guess, or, after they got whatever documents initially back, there were some agents that were like, okay, case closed. We believe him. We think that he gave, and this is someone who has lied over 30,000 times in 4 years. I mean, in the FBI, we call that a clue. That maybe, you don't want to take everything at face value. I mean, these are people who are trained in detecting deception, and they were willing to just accept assurances that that was all he had, and wanted to close the case, which was astonishing to me.
Yeah, I have to say it's just so incongruent with the way that they usually operate. And I'll say this, when you're on the other side of it, it can be very frustrating. You have a client who you think is innocent, or you represent a witness you think is telling the truth, and they're so convinced that she's lying, and it's like, come on, And here, every reason to be concerned, suspicious about this, and the FBI wants to pull their punches. I will say a lot of when I tweeted about this, a lot of the comments from my followers were like, hey, Christopher Wray is ruining the FBI and all the FBI agents are in the pocket of Trump. I think those are overstated. I'm curious what your thoughts are because you're you're an FBI alum and a lot closer to it to me. But I do think that there are some agents, and of course, we had certain agents that may have been leaking to Rudy Giuliani before the 2016 election, for example. I do think that there is definitely agents are mostly Republican and they always have been, and so I do think there's some element of that, but I think it's a little overstated.
Yeah, I don't think Christopher Wray is in the pocket of Trump. I think Christopher Wray may be kind of reacting to a more acute degree to the same things that Comey was. Remember the whole leak, Trumplandia leakers and this idea that there was going to be a mutiny if he didn't reopen the investigation into Hillary Clinton? There is definitely some subset that are full on, Trumplandia. And I think that Christopher Wray has been overly, I don't know, hesitant, cautious. Like, he has not been aggressive after January 6th. I think partly because he's afraid of part of the workforce that he thinks are going to, I don't know what he thinks they're going to do, which, connects to some of the stuff that's happening with Jim Jordan's committee. But, let's remember that after January 6th, Christopher Wray didn't even show up for the press conference.
Yeah.
About it 2 days later or whatever it was, 2 or 3 days later. I mean, I remember at the time being very shocked about that because, if it were a major foreign terrorist attack, Or frankly, if it had been a domestic terrorist attack that was not, a bunch of white people wearing MAGA hats, I believe that he would have been there making a very strong and forceful statement. So we see this sort of definitely, I think, a form of catering to this political subset, both in the public and I think in the workforce. I would probably not go so far as to say that he's, in Trump's pocket in the same way that some of it, like that Bill Barr or,
Cash Patel or something. Yeah.
Grinnell or, all these other people were.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, like I said, I think it's really overstated. I think people leap to conclusions, and I can understand that people are frustrated. But yeah, I actually think the way you're describing it is sort of the way that a lot of people have talked about Garland, right? There's been a lot of people saying, look, Garland is concerned about politicization, so he just wants to stay away from anything that relates to politics. And I think, you could argue the same is true of Ray. You mentioned Jim Jordan's committee. Obviously, we want to talk about that. I want to ask you about that. And I think, what's interesting and ironic, right? And that's the reason that I think it was good to start with the Washington Post piece is, while the underlying reporting suggests that, if anything, the FBI is pulling punches to help Trump, the disinformation campaign coming out of Fox News and Jim Jordan, who I just kind of regard him and some of those folks as essentially an arm of Fox News or in league with them. There's this disinformation campaign to suggest that the FBI is actually, trying to frame Trump or trying to work against MAGA or whatever.
Right. And so this gets to the weaponization, the select subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government, which is a subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee headed by Jim Jordan. And he has for months been intimating that he just has a league of whistleblowers waiting in the wings to come and just blow the lid off of rampant FBI abuse. And he's likened his committee to the Church Committee, which was a storied congressional committee from 1975, headed by Frank Church. There was also it was a senator, and then there was also a House committee called the Pike Committee that investigated intelligence abuses by the FBI, CIA, NSA, and led to many of the major reforms that we have in place now, as well as the oversight committees for the House and Senate intelligence committees. So it turns out, to the extent that we were talking about this subset, this sort of extreme MAGA subset that maybe in the FBI, they are manifesting for sure in these so-called whistleblowers who have, been fired or suspended basically for refusing to do their jobs. It seems to me, as far as I can tell, for when it comes to investigating January 6th. And so far, Jordan has not produced these witnesses publicly, but at least 3 of them have been interviewed by Democrats on the committee. And the Democrats released a 316-page report outlining what their preliminary findings are on these witnesses, which is that they, don't meet the definition of whistleblower, which is a legal definition where you have to expose actual misconduct or violations of the law, and then you get certain protections under the law. But that often they don't even have firsthand knowledge of the things that they're alleging. They traffic in conspiracy theories, including COVID conspiracy theories. And one of them was even giving interviews to Russian state propaganda outlets while he was an FBI employee, to Russia Today and Sputnik. So the whole thing is sketchy, and P.S., they're all funded by one Cash Patel, who not only gave them cash money, but also is paying for their lawyers and even helped one of them find employment at a conservative, I wouldn't call it a think tank, but some sort of conservative organization that's run by Mark Meadows. So the whole thing is really, really sketchy.
Yeah. So just speaking, as somebody who I've represented whistleblowers, that is what a whistleblower is somebody, like you said, knows about a violation of law or policy or something along those lines, and usually very bravely brings that to the attention of authorities and gets protections as a result, because that person has to be concerned about retaliation. At least that's how it is often in the government context. Sometimes, of course, there are whistleblowers in other contexts, like in private companies, where they'll go forward to the SEC. You'll hear about whistleblower awards and things like that. That's a little different. But in this context, it's all about, is the government breaking the law? Is the government violating its own policies? Like you said, I mean, that's not what we are seeing here. I really view these folks a lot like I view the Weaponization Committee as sort of a way of serving up clips for Fox News to try to lend some meat in the bones to conspiracy theories. I mean, from what little I've watched of the Weaponization Committee, I watched it a couple different times. It just seemed like kind of a panoply of conspiracy theories, Fox News conspiracy theories. And, something about living in that world and being part of that ecosystem is that if you have even like a little shred of something that you can hang your hat on, it sounds like there's some weight to it. Like, well, I heard there's an FBI agent saying there's a lot of problems there at the FBI, or, well, in Congress, they're investigating this. And it lends a weight to what otherwise would be. I mean, they still are conspiracy theories, but nonetheless, I think it can give supporters some confidence or feeling that there's something more to it.
Yeah, I call it information laundering.
Information laundering. Wow.
Yes. So you take the conspiracy theory and then you essentially launder it through some sort of legitimate process, or you allow it to be aired through something that has credibility. And then that sort of lends it the legitimacy. And that's exactly what you're talking about. We've seen it before in the lead up to the first impeachment. There was a lot of information laundering happening by the likes of Ron Johnson, that was, trying to bring into the record these, Burisma, Hunter Biden, all that stuff that that Trump was trying to get Zelensky to investigate Biden for. They were trying to make that into a thing. It reminds me of Mean Girls. Like, stop trying to make fetch happen. They were trying to make fetch happen. And I think that is what Jim Jordan is trying to do. I think, to your point, what one of the problems is that these conspiracy theories are coherent and make a lot of sense if you live in that bubble, because you hear it all the time. And you have all these tidbits that are like mashed together, and you're hearing it repetitively. And to the people that you're in communication with, everybody knows all of these details that all fit together. The pedophile ring that Trump is taking down, or whatever you want to call it. But once it gets exposed into real life, they fall apart. And I think we've seen that happen with the Twitter files hearings, where it turns out that the only people who were pressuring Twitter was the Trump administration. And I think that this is what's going to happen with Jim Jordan's committee. It's just not going to hold up to the light of day.
Well, one thing that I always say as a trial lawyer, if I had to say like my secret sauce, is that usually the simple story beats the complex story. So usually I try to make my story, my themes, everything that I'm doing to a jury simpler than the other side. Even if my story is more complicated, I find a way to make it simpler. And I think one thing that makes those conspiracy theories so appealing to people is they often are a very simple story. Like, Trump's always being investigated for things all the time, and he's always running into legal trouble. And so it's like, well, they're all after him, right? It's like a very simple explanation. It's not like, well, actually, he seems to do all of these really bad things all the time, which obviously would kind of contradict their prior assumptions and their biases. But also, it's easier for someone to believe like, oh, they must be after him, right? And it sort of fits into, kind of prejudices that people have. And I think, what this does is it tries to lend enough credibility to that to make it plausible. So very unfortunate, but something that I think is here to stay in the consequence of the last election. It's a consequence of losing the House.
Yeah, and I would encourage people to read the Democrat staff report on these witnesses. Even just there's a 5-page executive summary at the beginning, because what they're doing, I think, is essentially what we need to do with disinformation, which is to pre-bunk narratives. So there's always first mover advantage to getting out information. And so what Democrats are doing is basically saying, like, here are some facts you need to know about these so-called whistleblowers. And the more that people are educated on that, and the more that gets circulated and highlighted, the less traction that Jim Jordan's, selective framing, or however he's going to present it, is going to work. So, Renato, last week we talked a little bit about the Dominion Voting Systems lawsuit against Fox News for defamation. And last night we had a new filing with some more bombshells. And I'm wondering what you thought about that.
Yeah, it was really remarkable. I have to say, Asha, it really helped me appreciate what the legal team accomplished on Dominion's behalf. It's really, speaking as somebody who litigates cases all the time, it's actually quite remarkable what they were able to accomplish. And I don't know if that's apparent to everyone. I'll just say that First Amendment lawsuits are very, very difficult to make, and particularly when they're involving issues of public concern, because the standard is so high. You have to prove that someone either knew what they were saying was false or they had reckless disregard for the truth. And reading not just the transcripts, but also looking at the communications, there's no question that Dominion has evidence that could prove that. I think the fact that Dominion filed a motion for summary judgment, that may seem to you like, well, actually, usually that's the defense that's filing the motion for summary judgment, saying, there's not enough here, we don't want a trial. It's pretty rare for the plaintiff to do that, and it's really a sign of confidence here. And I can see why they're confident, because you literally have Rupert Murdoch saying, I didn't believe this stuff, I thought it was false. And the defenses that Fox is left with, and really what I took away from it is like, well, all of these hosts believed that, knew that what they were doing was false, but it wasn't the higher ups or it wasn't the head of the company. So like, it's like some factory worker knew they were, selling defective cars, but it never got up to the CEO, that sort of thing. And it's a very, very difficult defense for them. And I think it was just, it was quite remarkable.
Is that their defense?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like it was going all the way to the top. I mean,
that is their defense. In fact, Rupert Murdoch, in his deposition, sort of was taking a line where he said, some of the hosts, were promoting this, but not the network, in their view. Now, there's some very good evidence to the contrary. In fact,
right, because the CEO was like basically in on this and encouraging.
Correct, and also, yes, and also. There was, like, for example, on the first problematic segment they had was a Maria Bartiromo segment. And then there was some communications about like, oh boy, we need to dial that back. And then they just doubled down on it. In other words, there's some really good evidence on that. But nonetheless, that's sort of the line that Fox is taking because they don't have a lot to work with. And I mean, one thing that, really struck me, Asha, is why hasn't Fox settled?
Yeah, that's confusing to me too, because it's just more bad stuff keeps coming out.
Yeah, so that's something I've been doing some digging on and talking to people about. And basically, the kind of my sense of things. I mean, first of all, just so everyone understands, the damages here are immense. Okay, we're talking well over $1 billion in damages that Dominion's asking for, and that can have a multiplier on top of it, and you could get double or triple that. Okay, so very significant amount of damages here. But Fox, so Fox would ordinarily have an interest in settling, and by the way, an interest in settling before this filing. In other words, this would ordinarily be a kind of an inflection point in a case where the defense would say, hey, before all of this stuff gets aired to the public, let's settle. The fact that they didn't, really what it suggests to me is that if they admit fault here, and if they admit that they did something wrong, which is probably what it would take in order to get this thing settled, it would ruin their business plan. It would ruin their business model for their customers. They're very much put in a
Well,
box.
it would ruin their business plan, and I am assuming, or I suspect, that some settlement would involve them having to correct their statements on
Right.
air to the audience that they are so worried about alienating, right? So they would have to go on air. I mean, you can tell me more about what this would look like, but I'm assuming like, 10 times a day and be like, the claims that we made about Dominion voting systems was false and there was no election fraud and the election was won by Joe Biden. I mean, they would be forced to say that.
Yeah, yes, they would. And in fact, a good analog to this, if you look at what happened to Newsmax. So Newsmax, not as well funded as Fox News, they folded fairly early on, and they did have statements that were read on the air, and they were cutting people off. I mean, you can find the clips online on social media where it's actually kind of humorous, where you have Michael Lindell and other types of people going on Newsmax, and the hosts are like, whoa, we got to shut this down. Because actually in the First Amendment, one of the things also that Fox tries to do is they're like, well, we weren't promoting these personalities that were on the air were promoting this. We were just, this was an issue of public concern because important. Yeah, it was exactly important people were saying this, but you can get the first time you can get away with that, and say, okay, well, we put Trump on and he said this. But if you know that somebody's going to be saying things that are false and you give them a platform and you don't, push against that and you don't explain to the audience that that's false, you are liable for that. And there's a lot of case law on that. And so that doesn't really help Fox News at all. But I think that's another sort of distinction, just so people understand the distinctions there. But, in terms of, what happened here, it's remarkable because, and I think a couple of things really helped Dominion here, that they gave them some advantages over other lawsuits in the defamation space, is that, first of all, this happened, a lot of this was right during the pandemic. So a lot of conversations that might have otherwise been oral were actually written down because Murdoch was off in his estate in Australia, wherever he was.
That's such a good point, because I was wondering, like, why is there such an extensive paper trail here? This seems really dumb. Like, why are they like, we're totally lying, but we're going to air it anyway. I mean, you have all these like smoking gun emails, even to the extent of the legal standard is reckless disregard for the truth. And I think there's even a text or email from Tucker Carlson that says it would be incredibly reckless to say this on air. And it's sort of like, okay, so you're admitting. But anyway, that's a good point, that they were doing this because they were effectively remote at that time.
Yeah, and that I'm told that had a very significant impact on this case. Yeah, very significant impact. Another thing that had a big impact is Dominion was on top of this in real time and issuing preservation notices. And so really putting Fox in a spot where, and so Fox, if you look at the communications, Fox was in this tough spot because Trump, if you remember at the time, was promoting Newsmax and whatever the other OANN and all of that. So they didn't want to lose their audience. They felt like they were in this box there, but at the same time, they're remote. They've got these preservation notices, and so you literally have, in many ways, I mean, this may be, the most, the largest award we've had in First Amendment history. And it's coming at a time, by the way, legally, when conservatives in the Supreme Court are saying, we need to dial back New York Times versus Sullivan.
Defamation. They need to lower the standard.
Because you can't make a defamation case. The argument has been the First Amendment swung too far in that direction. You can never succeed as a plaintiff, so we need to dial it back. This may be the prime counterexample. Like, nope, when people are real liars, yes, you can, and get a lot of money out of them.
Yeah, and what Renato is referring to here is that for your ordinary person, the defamation standard is lower. That it has to be like knowingly saying something that is false, and that it results in damage to your reputation or economic detriment. But for public figures, where you want to encourage like a free flow of ideas and debate, there's a higher standard where you have to demonstrate actual malice. And the idea is that you don't want someone with a lot of influence to be able to start suing people for defamation and, chill the speech of people who might be criticizing them. Would you say that that's
which
right?
happens,
Yeah.
which happens even like we saw Trump sues everyone under the sun, or he claims that he's going to sue everyone under the sun, even despite that standard. And so you could have a situation where everyone from social media personalities to radio stations are pulling their punches against Trump because he's going to sue you. And so the purpose of it is literally to do that. And actual malice is the standard I mentioned earlier. You have to prove that the person either knew what they were saying was false or had reckless disregard for the truth. And in many states, there's laws, anti-SLAPP laws, which essentially also say that if you file a defamation suit, you have to pay the legal fees if it fails.
Yeah.
If the judge, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but the judge can essentially make it so the party bringing that even has to pay your legal fees. So it really is very friendly to the First Amendment. But this is the perfect storm where you not only have all this documentary evidence of people who knew they were lying and knew they were peddling lies and promoting lies, but also a plaintiff that has significant damages. That's the other thing, Asha. It's often very, very difficult in a defamation case to prove, damages, right? Like, let's say, you were being defamed by Fox News, which you have probably been at some point or another. You have been. But, like, how do we prove the damage? Like, maybe it improves your reputation. They put some expert on the stand who's like, oh, for Asha, getting attacked by Fox News helps her. So in this case, Dominion's entire business plan, and it was a substantial company and substantial amount of investment, their business plan was to convince municipalities and
they've lost
states
contracts.
and others. Right. The whole business plan is we're this trustworthy system for running voting. We want to convince political bodies to pay for our product. And so obviously destroying the trust in their product and making a political hot potato destroys their entire business.
Right. Though Fox is arguing that they haven't suffered any damages.
Yeah, of course. But I think Dominion's got a good argument there. There will be some cutback on damages. There's a thing in courts don't like to sort of peel back very excessive awards. So in other words, if you get, it may very well be that someone stole your invention and, built a massive $100 billion business out of it, but you're not going to get that full amount in a court case. And here, even though the damage to Dominion may be, $5 billion or one, whatever, I think they claim it's like, I think 1.6, and let's say you might have it trebled or quadrupled or quintupled, ultimately that may get pared down some, but nonetheless, I mean, it's going to be a very substantial amount of money.
Yeah, let the games begin. And my favorite part, by the way, is the text that was revealed last night where Tucker Carlson talks about how much he hates Donald Trump. Yeah,
that one I love. Didn't you love the time machine person with what's her face with the Kraken lawyer? Like the woman who went back and the woman, her source for the Dominion thing was someone.
Who was like somebody who was like reborn or
something. Yeah, it was like
weird spiritual. Yeah,
it was like Kang the Conqueror or Marty McFly or whoever. Sometime.
Oh yeah. She had gone back in time. Yeah, no, it was really wacky. But I will be interested to see if Trump turns on. I think he's been tweeting or truthing about Fox in the last week or so. Some critical things about Rupert Murdoch, and I'll be interested to see because one thing that triggers Trump is people saying bad things about him. So I'm curious. I'm sure Tucker Carlson has been on the phone with Trump, groveling and claiming that they got it wrong or they misattributed or whatever. Because otherwise, I will expect to see statements from Trump slamming Tucker and Fox News generally.
Wow. Well,
which will be really fun to watch. I will definitely pop popcorn for that.
There you go. Get some popcorn.
So speaking of popcorn, Renato, I'm curious. I'm wondering if we can have a little confessional here on what kind of trashy TV shows we watch. And I'm asking because I have recently been alerted to 90 Day Fiancé.
Oh, we tried. So we watched a few episodes of that. We thought it was really good, but then we didn't follow through. Like, I don't know what happened with that, but that's a really good one. That's supposedly very good.
Yeah, I started with season 1. It's sketchy and gives me sex trafficking vibes. So I'm not sure if I want to keep watching it, but basically, I feel like my gateway drug was Bachelor, which I hadn't watched in 20 years. And then last spring, I started watching the current season and somehow got sucked in. And then that led me to Bachelor in Paradise. And then that led me to Love is Blind.
Okay, we're big Love is Blind people.
Love is Blind Brazil, Love is Blind Japan. And so I am now just fully in the shame spiral of trashy dating shows.
Okay, so we do a lot of the trashy dating shows because especially like my wife's like, look, let's just watch something fun and like not complicated and not scary or intense.
It's mind candy.
Yeah.
Or depressing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, let's watch something lighthearted. And so we watch that stuff. We just saw, I know we're late in this, the Love is Blind reunion or whatever they call it. Very interesting, right? I didn't see some of the twist. I'm not going to give anything away, but I didn't see some of the twists coming at the very end of that. I'm sure you've watched that, Asha.
Oh yeah, that was a twist.
That was a twist, right?
Yes.
I didn't see that coming.
I was shocked. I actually was like, oh my god, and then I had to
that person
get online
did that to the other one.
Yes.
I was like, what? Okay, so that was like a twist there.
What?
Yeah, 100%. Bachelor, I always thought one thing, talk about creepy vibes. So one thing I remember watching the first season of The Bachelor 20-something years ago and thinking it was so weird because the guy is like hooking up with like multiple women at the same time on a show. And then there's this like rose and romance and love BS that's sort of like put on top of it because like, is he really having romantic love with all these people that he's like hooking up with at the same time? Like, it's just kind of weird, right? Like, isn't it weird to be like, oh, I love you, knowing that like he's saying the same thing to like all these other people that you interact with all the time? Like, it's super weird, right?
It's so weird. It is. It's like Sister Wives or something.
Yes. Have you watched that show?
I wouldn't be able to do it.
I
would not be able to do it.
I've not watched that show, by the way. Sister Wives. Have you watched that?
I haven't watched it either. I'm just assuming that it's about people sharing.
Yes, it's like a plural marriage thing, but I think it's sister wife now because all the rest of them like ditched the guy is what I read. So there you go. But yeah, no, but I definitely we definitely love that stuff. We love all sorts of goofy stuff though. Like, I mean, one of our favorite Netflix shows was Is It Cake? Have you seen that?
No.
Oh my God. That's like maybe the best show ever. Is it cake? Basically what it is they have these pastry people who make cakes that look like real objects. So they'll have like, let's say I'm talking in a microphone now. They'll have a bunch of microphones lined up. One of them's a cake.
So a dessert imposter.
Yes, one of them's a cake. And like you're 5 feet away, 10 feet away. Can you guess? Is it cake? Which one is cake? And like that's part of the thing. And then like they're creating, the chefs create different things. They'll be like, okay, you've got to create different things, and then they'll have somebody have to guess which one is cake. It's super fun. It's way better than it sounds.
I might have to watch that. We've watched Cake Wars here. My kids and I, we watch a lot of the cooking shows. So Cake Wars. We very into kids baking show.
Okay, all right. That's no.
Kids baking show, like it's fun to watch, and then I feel guilty because I find some of the kids annoying, and then I'm like, they're just kids, like. But anyway, but they're actually very talented, so it's kind of cool to watch them make all these things. We've watched, oh my gosh, what are some of the other ones? The one with Alton Brown, Cutthroat Kitchen.
Oh wow.
Food Truck Wars.
See, I've done lots.
There's all kinds.
I've done lots of those. We've done. Yeah. Have you done? There was one where it's like it was like where you had to choose between a wedding and a mortgage, like your wedding and like you had to choose. You got a free. They bought you either a free home or the wedding of your dreams, and you had to make a choice. Have you seen that one?
I vaguely remember.
Yeah,
this.
and it was like they did this whole thing. They have like a realtor and then like a wedding planner, and they're like, we can throw you the wedding invitation. Like, we'll do this, and it's like you can have this over the top, $50,000 wedding, or you can get the down payment on a house. And my wife is a realtor, so she's always like the house. She always wanted the person to choose the house. And I'm like, I get it, but it's like funny because you're like, I try to figure out like how foolish are these people to blow, their life savings, it's not like this windfall on one day, and like the half of the people do. Like that's always like an interesting. That was like one of our ones for. Oh, another one is the Married at First Sight. That's like we've watched like a bazillion seasons of that, where like these supposed experts like decide who you're going to marry, and it's like an arranged marriage. Like you show up at the wedding day and you walk down the aisle and you've never met the guy before, but you have to you take the vows, and you're like, okay, this guy's really ugly, but I got to roll with it. Oh, that's super interesting.
Do they get paid?
No, they have to sign, I think, prenups before the show. But no, you have to get a divorce after too. No, it's actually.
Oh my God.
Well, the argument is like, look, if you're bad at your picker's bad, then you're going to have this panel of experts that are going to make a decision. They've got like a therapist, they've got a sex therapist, they've got a minister. They all kind of like get together and they are like, oh, we really like whatever, Jane and John. These two would be a good match, and this and that. And you literally just walk down the aisle, you meet this guy, and you have to marry him. And then it's usually like some of them like are clearly not into each other, but they have to like live together and go through the motions to be on this honeymoon. Some of them, I mean, occasionally they do work out and they stay married and they have a bunch of kids and stuff. But it's got a better success rate than The Bachelor, because usually the people are.
Oh, The Bachelor record is horrible.
Well, right, because they're all like super hot. Like it's like hot, successful people, whatever it is, like who are just want to be on TV. Whereas these people are kind of, they look kind of more normal, like normal people. And they're like, because you have to get married. So it's like you have to really be into it. It's usually people who've had like bad luck with getting married for some reason. Like you're usually like there's some problem.
I don't know. They should do 90 Day Fiance. Apparently you can just like go online and find someone and ship them over.
So do these people speak English? The 90 Day Fiance people, do you get somebody who can
sometimes,
and sometimes not? Like you need you use like Google Translate to talk to your wife or something.
Let me tell you, the first season, this dude brought this Brazilian woman over who was incredibly beautiful, but looked really young and did not speak a lot of English, and I'm just like, I don't know how I feel about this. This just feels weird.
Seems exploitive. It's like the people who.
So maybe I might need to watch more seasons, because if it's all dudes bringing women in from other countries, like that's not. I don't know. That's just gonna make me uncomfortable. I need to watch that.
Yeah, it just seems super exploitive, right? It's just like, hey, these people have very little in terms of material goods, like being taken advantage of by men in the United States who want to prey on young women.
Now, look, I did after watching season 1. Look all these people up. I mean, because the first season was like 10 years ago or something. They're all still married. They have kids.
Well, yeah, because like one of the
they look happy on Instagram.
Because your alternative is to go back to like whatever, right? Angola, and like live in poverty. So or whatever. It's like, okay, we're gonna
right. Russia,
right?
Exactly.
It's like, okay, you could live in this village without running water, or you can be married to this really old ugly dude, and you get to play Nintendo Switch or whatever. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Like marriage is not, in my view, in and of itself, like you win a prize, right? Like you want a marriage that's happy and fulfilling and all of that stuff.
I agree.
MSW Media.